Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 5th episode of our Weapons mini-series. I have Sir Imperial Mike and Sheldon with me today. What we're going to be going through today is the strength weapons. So these are going to be all the weapons that you see from after the Glittering Mines all the way into Vexor's Tower. Now, for those of you who missed it, when we went with the starting weapons, make sure that you guys go ahead and click the link in this corner, the upper right hand corner, which you guys can go back through, and these are the all 4 classes starting weapons and getting through the Glittering Mines. Now, what we always want to run through is what are the most important abilities when it comes to these particular weapons. Now again, for those of you that wanted to see a full breakdown of all the weapons abilities, we also did a video on that as well too. Go ahead and click that in the upper right link. It is our first episode that we did on weapons. Now, when we're looking at the top abilities, we look at Rush, Reset, Heavy Attack, Speed Down, Splash, and Focus Restore. But with the strength weapons, what they do is they primarily rely on output of damage. So what we're going to be looking through quite a bit is the Heavy Attack, Splash, but there are some single reset and speed down weapons that you can look at that are very beneficial to use. Now, with the strength weapons, as I had just mentioned, is that what we're going to want to do is the heavy power-up. Now, when we talked about awareness weapons, the heavy power-up for strength weapons not only is very important just because of the higher damage output, is that your base damage output with a lot of the strength weapons are even higher than awareness. And on top of it too, it's not as taxing in terms of accuracy. It's usually around 25%. Timeline manipulation. There are a few weapons that do allow for you to do speed down and reset. And of course, we will go through those weapons today. Now, because there isn't a lot of utility when it comes to strength weapons, you are primarily using them to do a ton of damage and just destroy things quickly. There are going to be some secondary abilities that we do want to look at, and that is Freeze and Pierce. Also, if you're doing a ton of damage, being able to do a crit with that damage is really powerful. And also, speed is really huge, because if you get more of an opportunity to swing your badass weapon, you're in a very good spot to kill the enemies, which is what you're trying to do with your strength weapon. Guys, is there anything I missed starting off here?
No, right on.
Yeah. I just want to clarify that there are very little speed down or reset weapons. There might be only one weapon for both reset and one weapon for speed down. But yeah, everything else is just splash and heavy. If it doesn't have those, then it has the secondary abilities that we talked about in the abilities videos, such as the freeze or pierce.
Yeah, and if you're looking for particular types of abilities, what you're going to rely on is either your talent class or your intel class to be able to do those abilities. And what those abilities do is it actually gives your strength hero an opportunity to do this high damage output, not only by himself, but also do it multiple times. So starting off here for the tier 2 weapons, our top one is the Bastard Sword. Now the Bastard Sword does 20 damage. Now the one thing that you will notice if you did watch our awareness weapon and our talent weapons videos prior to this, you can already tell right here, this 20 damage weapon out of tier 2 is way above any of the tier 2 weapons damage output that you would see from talent and awareness. Also, if you look here too, it does cleave. So what cleave does is a power-up ability that has that minus 25% accuracy and does 30 total damage. So that's the big difference with power-up abilities with strength weapons compared to other ones, because if you have a lower base damage, let's say it's around 15, you're only going to actually then do 21 with a power-up. Well, since the base of this is already at 20, it already exceeds what a power-up ability would be like with an awareness weapon, and therefore you would do 20, you're actually going to now be doing 30. And if you're able to pump some focus into it and maybe are able to do a crit, you can do some really nasty damage. So then the Warhammer for number 2. Again, we always value the power-up ability more than anything. But with this particular one, is it does allow for you to do splash damage. Now, if you go onto the Clobberers, the good thing with this weapon is it does have the power-up ability, but it also gives you a high crit chance, but it does have a lower base damage at 16. Again, we're going to be jumping through these probably pretty quickly because what I'm going to be focusing, or I should say what we are going to be focusing on, is what the actual damage output of these are. We're not going to be spending a lot of time talking about, oh, this does daze, or this does freeze, or this does that. We're just looking to literally just punish the enemy. And Stingers rounds out number 4. This one also does have a 10% crit chance. It will allow for you to do Pierce, and it allows for you to be a little bit faster than what you could be with some of the other weapons. Anything that I missed there with these first 4 weapons?
No, not really. We're just mostly going to be talking about the primary 2 skills we're looking for, heavy attack and splash, for the most part, throughout this entire strength video.
Yeah, these are the 4 best that you get out of tier 2. And I just want to point out that Clobbers and Stingers, I believe Clobbers comes from the Lost Civilization DLC. And same thing from the Stinger, so you won't be able to get that if you don't have Lost Civilization.
Another thing I want to say, another thing I want to say before we continue is we do have a common theme that the top weapons are going to be 2-handers and the lower weapons are going to be 1-handers, because the 2-handers are always going to be doing more damage than the 1-handers. So we don't value the 1-handers as much, unless if the 1-hander has a power up, then we'll value a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, so the Bastard Sword's Cleave gives you the potential to one-shot an enemy, and that's, being able to get the kill is extremely important. Warhammer is a little bit below that because it can't power up beyond its 21 damage, but it does have the ability to splash and do essentially more damage overall, just spread out a little bit. So you're trying to just get as much damage output as you can so that you can kill enemies quicker. Clobbers is nice, though, because of the daze. So not only are you able to do an individual daze attack, but you could also do the Clobber splash attack that also dazes the enemy and potentially sets them back slightly. So that also is very handy, along with the 10% crit chance and the boost to the speed for your hero.
Yeah, the good point, I'm so glad that Sheldon actually talked about the 2-hander aspect to this, and we're not going to get into the hero selection too much here, but this is why when we talked about just in the past, why a lot of people, what we see too, especially beginners, is they'll grab Blacksmith and they'll want to use a 1-hander because they want to make sure that steadfast procs. Well, why don't you just grab this 2-handed Bastard Sword and absolutely just annihilate the enemy, and then you don't have to worry about taking on any damage whatsoever. That's pretty much the mentality we have. Grab a powerful weapon, go ahead and use it. And if you just so happen to run across that the best weapon that you have is a single-hander, great. But don't be basing your selection on because you can use Steadfast. I will just kind of say to this, I'm not saying that the Woodcutter is the best hero to select for strength. I want to make sure I'm crystal clear on that. But this is why I just prefer the Woodcutter over the Blacksmith, because once you kind of get out of the tier 1 weapons, you're almost always going to have a 2-hander, and at least you can proc his ability, and you're not going to proc the Blacksmith's ability.
Yeah, strength weapons, their main point is to deliver as much damage as possible. You don't want to be taking your highest DPS character and using them to taunt and eliminating your ability to deliver the damage.
Now, I also want to make it clear, because we haven't truly made it clear for the other videos, which was awareness and talent. But our primary strategy when playing for the king is to limit damage as much as possible, and doing much damage as much as possible to the enemy is a way to make sure you take as least amount of damage as possible.
Yeah, if you kill an enemy, they can't hit you back. So you want to kill them as quickly as possible so you're not taking as many hits.
This is also why we primarily like heavy attack a little bit better than splash, because heavy has a better chance of killing an enemy. Even though splash does more damage overall, it's actually less likely to kill an enemy with the splash, which is why it's slightly less valued over the splash, even though it does. I mean, over the heavy, even though it does more damage overall.
For sure. So let's kind of round out the rest of these tier 2 weapons. The bronze cannon is just kind of a special single check weapon. Interestingly enough, Mike went into great detail in our in our second weapons video going on to beginners weapons. This is like one that can do a lot of damage to multiple different enemies because it does splash and does 18 to each of them. You could also attach this to your scholar because he can do focus restore. This is just kind of a unique type item, if you will. You want to be careful with it because you have to reload it and such. But we definitely do value the other weapons above this. Cursed Longsword. It is a 3-check breakable weapon. You can't focus it, which is actually kind of a detriment to it. Because sometimes you're going to want to make sure that you want to get certain damage out, and it's nice to be able to focus it. The hook sword, in fact, this is kind of somewhat of a special one. You can actually get the hook sword in tier 1, but this has to do with a special side quest that you can unlock like in the Guardian Forest at times. So you can actually have the hook sword going into Glittering Mines. That's rare to get, but it is possible to get it beforehand. The cool thing with hook sword, it does allow you to reset an enemy too, but doesn't have really a ton of damage output like you would with the number 1 sword on this list. And War Axe, 16 damage weapon. Because we do value reset more than the power-up ability, that's why we put the hook sword just above this one. So if you do get in a pinch and you do need to reset, you can reset with hook sword. It's kind of a nice little added bonus compared to the War Axe. Anything to add with these?
Bronze cannon, although it's a strength weapon, I actually prefer putting that on a scholar that has a higher focus pool, because I don't want to have those weapons that are guns fail. So you're pretty much always using a focus to make sure that the gun goes off. So I don't even care the fact that it's a strength based check. I'm going to be spending focus no matter what anyway.
Not to mention, most people who run strength characters, especially players who don't have access to the DLC, are very likely to choose a strength character with no speed, pretty much. So Monk, Busker, Blacksmith, Woodcutter, all those classes are really slow. And by the time, if you use a cannon on a really slow character, by the time you shoot the cannon, you probably already have an enemy dead. Or if you don't, they're so low health that all that damage you shoot at them is going to be wasted. Like maybe there's probably going to be like all 3 characters are probably like at 7 or 8 health or something, and you end up wasting over half your damage output from the gun because your other 2 characters already whittled them down.
Yeah. Guns are best when you're facing 3 enemies. The fewer enemies remaining, the less value you get out of your gun. Actually, having a talent character that can rush somebody using the bronze cannon actually then becomes fairly valuable for you. So you can make sure that you can get the 3 damage, the damage into 3 enemies early on in a fight.
As early as you can.
For sure. So let's kind of just like quickly glance over. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time here on these particular weapons. Again, we're already getting down to 9, 10, 11, and 12. Cave Troll does 19. The splash damage isn't really all that great. Tomahawk, again, 16 damage, nothing really fancy there. The Chip Saber at 15. None of these really have any special abilities that we're really worried about. The Great Torch is kind of nice maybe if you are doing dungeon crawl, so you can use it for the fine distance. In particular modes, it's helpful to have that additional fine distance, especially if you're roaming around in the poison bog and you didn't get a torch to begin with. This ability is kind of nice to just pocket this weapon, but hopefully you had a better weapon than this to use. So let's just kind of move on here from the tier 2 weapons and go directly into the tier 3 weapons. Now, right away, you see a pretty decent weapon here in the tier 3. What's interesting is, if you notice, is this Iron Anchor. You're available to get this, I believe, in night markets typically, and in certain, I don't know if you usually get them in drops. The reason why I'm questioning when you can get this, I've had an argument for a while now that I actually haven't had access to Iron Anchor, and Mike just kept blaming it on the fact that I never checked night markets. But in order to get access to this, if you do get a chance to get this, this is a great weapon to get in this particular tier. If you notice, it does 30 damage. I really do want to make this point here, and I think it's important to talk about, is look a little bit on 3 and 4 right now too. 26 damage, 25 damage. These are tier 3 weapons. When we go back to talking about the awareness hero, they don't even do this damage output. This individual, this strength hero, is already doing this with tier 3 weapons. This, coupled with the video we just had about talent, is if you have the iron anchor in your hand, which Mike actually mentioned this in the talent video, you rush this hero that ends up getting the iron anchor, because you likely don't get 2 iron anchors, so you're not going to run 2 strength heroes. You can rush this guy, and he also is able to do speed down and gets 2 attacks off. This is massive to be able to do this at this point in the game. You haven't even made it to the King's Maze yet. You have a 30 damage speed down weapon, and if you couple that with a talent hero that can do single rush, you can literally obliterate your way through anything at this point. So this is why we value having a strength hero on our team so much, is just because of this sheer damage output. Again, going back to what we talked about with the blacksmith, this is why the blacksmith becomes kind of irrelevant in terms of steadfast, is that two-hander, 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 two-hander. There's no one-handers on this list. Anything that you guys would like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify when you're comparing strength with awareness again. If you compare any of these strength weapons to literally tier 5 awareness weapons, the strength still does more damage than the tier 5 awareness weapons for the most part. It's ridiculous. And the fact that some of these weapons do splash and heavy attack that are way more effective than the awareness versions. If you can rush them, they just do so much damage compared to the awareness characters. It's just not even funny. Yeah, Iron Anchor ends up being a weapon that you can win the game with easily. In fact, Iron Anchor is actually better than many tier 4 and tier 5 strength weapons. You'll notice that as we get there.
So
Iron Anchor is very unique.
Why don't you go and talk a little bit as to why you value the Iron Anchor? What about it gives it such a leg up on a lot of other weapons?
Well, one thing that is nice about Iron Anchor is it has a very unique type of splash attack. Most other strength weapons have their splash attack at a perfect effect only, and this one does not. So if you miss a check on your A-way skill, you actually still get the splash off. If you do happen to get the perfect on the away, you add wet to all the enemies, which is really nice because wet gets rid of immunities. One extra thing that wet also does is not only does it get rid of immunities, it also gets rid of a special enemy effect. Like 2 arrows. That means that you have to perfect affect the enemy. That's gone too. So enemies like cut purses and imps, things where you have to perfect hit them. Once you splash them once, you can then just have any other character swing at them. They can miss a check and you can still kill them, which is nice. And yeah, the speed down is a nice bonus. The crippling blow is actually a very powerful speed down compared to other speed downs. When you do the crippling blow speed down, it actually shoots them off the timeline quite a bit compared to other speed downs. It's a more powerful speed down effect. That's not you can't really tell how powerful certain speed down effects are on weapons. It doesn't tell you that, but we'll tell you now that the Iron Anchor speed down effect is way better than, let's say, a awareness weapon speed down. Like, they both do speed down, but yet the crippling blow shoots them way far back than any of the other speed down weapons.
Yeah, crippling blow is the strongest speed down attack in the game. It sends enemies very, very far back on the timeline. As Daddio mentioned earlier, if you rush someone who's using the Iron Anchor and they're able to get 2 attacks off, you can actually do a crippling blow on 2 separate enemies. One of the places I like to use this is in Lost Civilization, when you're there's a particular battle where you're fighting two Bison Tor champions. And if I rush my Iron Anchor, I could cripple one of them and cripple the second one, and both of them fall really far back on the timeline, and then I could just rush the Iron Anchor the second round, and he could just splash into both of them and basically kill them all before they ever get a chance to attack. It makes it completely the easiest battle of all time. The negative speed on the Iron Anchor is negated if you're rushing them from an intelligence hero or a talent hero. So the speed doesn't really affect your strength character when you're rushing them from a talent or an intelligence character. So it becomes really powerful. Now, one other thing I want to mention about the Iron Anchor is that A-Way attack. 30 damage with 15 splash. What's really interesting about this is it's not obvious for most people. The main attack of this weapon, which is the smash attack, is a 30 damage maximum attack. The A-Way is also 30 damage maximum to that attack as well. There is no reduction from the main attack of 30 damage to the splash attack of 30 damage. Now, if you were to compare the Iron Anchor to another hammer in the strength class, for example, the Great Hammer, which we're going to get to in a bit, the Great Hammer actually does 35 damage for its maximum attack, but its splash is 30. So there's actually a 5 damage difference between the maximum attack and the actual splash attack. Now, it turns out the way the game handles that's not a 5 damage reduction from the maximum to the splash. That is a percentage reduction. It actually turns out to be a 15% reduction in the damage to the splash attack. The Iron Anchor has no reduction at all, no percentage reduction at all. Now, where that matters is if you do attack up. If you do an attack up for your strength hero, when you're like, for example, 100% damage boost from a Hildebrandt's reserve potion, you double the damage with A-Way. But when you do that with another hammer that has a 15% reduction, you're getting that 15% reduction applied to your power-up attack as well. So it turns out the Iron Anchor literally does more damage with its splash when you're using an attack up than what looks like an equivalent weapon that does the same splash damage. They're not equivalent.
Just to clarify, the splash damage that's displayed on the weapon of Great Hammer looks exactly the same as A-Way with except for the accuracy debuff. Pretend Great Hammer doesn't have the accuracy debuff. Both skills look exactly the same, but yet Anchor does more damage with its splash than the Great Hammer does, even though it has the same damage range because of that weird 15% reduction thing, because that's actually comparing your splash with your main attack. If your main attack is higher than your splash, then it's going to actually reduce your splash percentage based off of your main attack. Since the Iron Anchor has the same damage as its single target compared to its splash, that's why it has no accuracy penalty. It's really strange.
And I'm glad you guys took the opportunity to kind of explain all that with the Iron Anchor, because there is some unique aspects to that particular weapon than there is for the rest of the weapons. Because the rest of these weapons are pretty straightforward, right? It's not like it's a really bad thing if you get the Battle Axe at this point. The Battle Axe is 26 damage with a power-up ability. It's a really good one to have if you weren't able to get the Iron Anchor. Again, the Broadsword, very similar. High damage, also does a heavy attack. The size are very interesting. You do not get this. Council players, wah, wah, we don't get anything.
Yeah.
But that one has, the Sias has single target reset as well as the ability to pierce, which makes it really, really strong.
Yeah.
It also does crit chance with a 10 speed is really amazing to add that to a strength hero. So really, really great. But unfortunately, you gotta have Lost Civilization to be able to have a chance to get that.
And I'm gonna make one last point too. For the people there that do play on console, and we talked about single target rush and why that's important to be able to like get your strength there to hit twice. There's also a component to this too that Gladiator is a very, very fast strength hero, but on console you don't get access to that. So the rest of the strength heroes are really slow. So to be able to rush up your high damage output hero to where he's actually at the front of the line, now he'll get an opportunity again, maybe a couple spots down, to be able to do his normal first attack. But that's really helpful too, especially with Iron Anchor. It does give you a speed down reduction. Being able to rush him to the front of the line will allow him to do those big attacks that these guys are talking about. So moving on, just kind of rounding out the tier 3 weapons, we have Iron Bow. Iron Bow does have a heavy attack, but again, we go back to bows. They do have a higher penalty accuracy reduction, so it's at a 30% accuracy reduction compared to a 25. But it does also allow you to do reset. You don't necessarily land that ability that often, because the one thing with strength heroes that we typically do, you guys may not do this, but we don't usually really worry about the strength stat too often. We like to just use poor focus into them at times to be able to do his really heavy power-up attacks. And we like to be able to do like high crit with the armor and stuff like that we use with like Inferno gear. So we can really maximize the damage that they're outputting.
That's a good point to bring up right now. I've said this a few times, not in this video, but in other videos. Of the 4 main stats, intelligence, awareness, strength, and talent, awareness and strength don't really need their main stat to be as high as the others, because awareness and strength, for the most part, just care about damage. If you miss 1 check on your damage weapon, you still do decent damage. So you might as well, if you go for high crit chance and high damage on those weapons, even if you miss 1 check, you're still going to do tons of damage. So accuracy is not as important on those weapons. But weapons that have really good support skills, which is intelligence and talent, those weapons you do need really high checks, because if you miss 1 check on any support skill, it's a whiff entirely. You don't do anything.
Yeah. So then to kind of go through the rest of these, Vortimer, if I'm even pronouncing that correctly, just does splash, but it's a very big reduction in splash, so it's pretty much a 28 damage weapon. Again, just does 28 damage. That's why it's somewhat up there. Machetes is kind of nice. It is 22. It gives you more speed and crit chance. Again, if you don't have the DLC, you won't have access to this. So unfortunately, Knight's Mace, 22 damage there. Then as you kind of keep going down this list, Zeus's Blade is kind of nice to have the shock ability. You don't necessarily really are worried about that utility too much, but there's certain aspects you can use it on, especially maybe if you want to use it for the Fire Revenant at the very end of the game. It's kind of a weird thing to hold on to the entire game. Hopefully you can get access to a different type of shock weapon if you need to. And then we just keep going down the list. 20 damage weapon.
Yeah,
20 damage
we're getting into
damage.
the one-handed weapons now.
Yeah.
Yes. So anything that you guys would like to add with the last 8 weapons, I kind of ran through there quickly.
Now, these are just going down in amount of damage that it can output. And again, we're looking for the most damage we can get out of a strength weapon. So the 2-handed weapons were, at the top with the heavy damage or the splash attacks. Now we're getting down into the 1-handed weapons. So Zeus Blade is probably better than a longsword with respect to its, ability to shock something and still do damage and allow a shield. But essentially, we're just continuing to fall down the list as far as the value of that weapon and what it brings to the table.
Okay, so then we spend a lot of time, of course, on Iron Anchor. There's a reason why we did that. We definitely feel it's the most valuable weapon heading into King's Maze. You're going to learn a little bit more about Iron Anchor here in a minute, kind of beyond this. But King's Maze, if you get Iron Anchor, you're good to go. You pretty much have the weapon you need. You're ready to go into King's Maze. All you're trying to do is round out the rest of your 2 heroes, so you're ready to go for that part. Again,
and you will find Iron Anchor in night markets. You can also find it in goblin shops, and it's also relatively cheap. It does not cost very much when you actually find it. So, keep your eye out for when night comes around. Go and check every night market you visited throughout the game to that point and see if any night market anywhere has that Iron Anchor. And if you see it, you got to rush to that night market while you have the time.
And if you're playing Dungeon Crawl or Into the Deep, you can also get Iron Anchor through Wereshark camps or ships. They're very dangerous. You're very likely to use Godspears in the fight, but if you really badly want Iron Anchor, that's another way to get it.
Yeah, a Wereshark is using an Iron Anchor against you.
You, yeah.
So be careful if you try to get your Iron Anchor by attacking a Wereshark.
All right, and then the one thing that you'll see that, of course, is a little bit different than the other weapons that we've talked about in the past is all the tier 3, of course, are all on this list. So the top tier 3 ones are the top ones to go into King's Maze. Why? Does the most damage. It's pretty much what you're looking for. And we're pretty much saying the same thing over and over and over.
Yep.
So as we step out of King's Maze, you start getting access to a little bit higher damaged weapons. But again, you'll start seeing this kind of threshold in kind of the 30 range with these weapons. Great Hammer at 32 not only does Crushing Blow, which is the heavy attack, but there's an element to this Great Hammer that you have to pay attention to. It's actually worse accuracy than what you do get with a bow. So you are at minus 35%. So you need to be aware of that when you're using this Great Hammer. The cool thing is, though, Shockwave, if you are able to hit a 5-check minus 10% accuracy, you can daze the entire enemy. You probably need to pour some focus in to do that just to make sure that you do land that. But you also do get, like what Mike was talking about, you do get a reduction in your damage when you are using that splash ability compared to what you were talking about, the Iron Anchor.
Some of these weapons that have really bad accuracy penalties, like this Crushing Blow, this is another reason why we like crit chance build more than strength. Because maximizing your strength, you still have low accuracy when you're trying to roll this Crushing Blow. But if you get your crit chance to go off, the entire attack is auto perfect. And if you auto perfect Crushing Blow, that is an insane amount of damage. Not to mention the extra damage that is added, because a lot of gear that gives you crit chance also gives you damage. So if you get crits on weapons with really low accuracy, it's going to auto perfect and you're going to do so much more damage. So you don't necessarily need strength. You could just do crit chance build. Just a little.
Yeah. I don't know if we've mentioned this before, but the game actually checks whether you've gotten a crit for your attack before it starts doing the checks for each roll. So if the game says, okay, I got a Great Hammer and you're at a minus 30% accuracy, before I check the 30% accuracy on each one of those rolls, let me check crit first and see if you get a crit. If you get a crit, then the game basically says, okay, all of the checks are going to be auto perfect. I'm not even going to bother to roll on the 30%. It just shows you the animation of you getting a perfect roll. So think of crit chance as being an artificial accuracy. If you get the crit to go off, you get 100% perfect on that weapon no matter what. So odd thing about that is, you know, a gimmicky weapon like a Walloper, the Walloper has like a minus 50% accuracy on it. But if I've raised my crit chance up to 50%, then half the time I'm going to get a perfect roll on that Walloper, even though I got terrible percentages on the rolls. It doesn't matter. So anytime you're running a strength character, we actually don't care how high their strength stat is, because we're going to slap on as much crit chance to that strength hero as possible so that it really doesn't matter that I got a low percent accuracy on the weapon. I'm going to get crits to go off constantly and get the maximum damage out of that weapon with the 25% boost to damage on top of it.
Another weird thing about crit chance is it does actually affect utility skills, which is really odd. So if you're using a skill from any class, by the way, rush, reset, doesn't matter. If you get your crit chance to go off, it will actually auto perfect your support skill. You'll never know you got a crit unless you're playing monk, but it does help your utility skills.
Yeah, every ability that you use on a weapon has the chance to be critted, even if it's not a damaging attack or a damaging ability.
And this is why I'm lucky to have you guys doing this podcast with me. There's no way in hell I would have ever figured that out with crit chance. And for those of you watching this video, I guarantee you probably 99% of you guys didn't know that. So it's this fantastic extra information that a lot of people don't realize. It's something I would have never even have noticed. I just would have been clicking buttons and be like, oh, I got a perfect roll here, and not realizing that crit chance was the one that was actually allowing for that to happen.
Yep,
is pretty crazy. So it's great
because
information.
Because crit chance is so good, that's where a weapon like the dual hammers is actually pretty good. It's fairly high on the list because it's giving you plus 10% to your crit chance on top of the fact that it's giving you additional speed. It's, you know, less damage than the Iron Anchor, but it's still giving you a good chance to get that crit. and adding 25% damage to your attack. So that's dual hammers is kind of like a poor man's iron anchor.
Yeah.
And it can it dazes and stuns in addition to the damage that it's doing. So dual hammers is also a really decent weapon to have.
Yeah, so as you guys can tell here, just kind of Jade Blades, high crit chance, also as a two-handed weapon, gives you some additional speed too. It doesn't do the extra over the top damage, like the Great Sword and the Great Hammer would do. So that's why we just have it a little bit lower here. But again, they're really good weapons to have. Again, I'm just going to keep reiterating this point. It's going to drive people who love awareness heroes. Like, I'm going to just drive them mad. But like, there's so many more options for higher damage output weapons with the strength hero than there are for the awareness hero. What's kind of interesting here is you do see a couple single-handed weapons here. You see the Gladius and the Scimitar. The Iron Cannon we don't really would use too often in the Morning Star. The Gladius does have a special aspect to it. It does do single target reset. It is nice. But again, we want to be clear, as much as we like the reset aspect to it, we run an intel and talent hero to be able to do our utility at this point. We're not looking for our strength hero to be providing a lot of utility. So therefore, we prefer to not hold on to this particular weapon. We would like to have, a lot more damage output.
Yeah, strength is the opposite of talent. Strength, you're looking for damage. Talent, you're looking for utility. You're not looking for damage for talent. You're not looking for utility for strength.
So anything you guys want to add on here before I keep going down the tier 4 weapons list?
Not really. Essentially, from the Scimitar on down, they're kind of ranked by the amount of damage that they produce. So if you look at the Iron Cannon, its explosive shot, that's, you're doing the explosive shot against 3 enemies, and then you have to reload. So it's counting, 35 damage 3 times is what you're doing. The Scimitar with its cleave potentially can deliver more damage over time than what the Iron Cannon can do. So that's why Scimitar is rated higher. But Iron Cannon will deliver more damage, especially if you get it off at the beginning of a battle before, more damage than what a Morning Star could deliver over the same amount of time.
And another thing about weapons like Scimitar with its cleave, heavy attacks you control 100%, and what I mean by that is you can control what enemy you target cleave on, which means you're not going to cleave an enemy with 12 armor, so the entire damage is very likely to go through because you're going to purposely target the enemy that has the least amount of armor. In the Anchor's case, since you're shooting everything, very likely a lot of the damage is going to get blocked by armor, which makes the 105 not actually 105. It's probably more like 80 or less.
So kind of keep moving on from this point. You have the Fire Sword. Again, it's just a weapon that does ignite, does 27 damage. Shock Mace does 21, does shock. Jade Saw, 21 damage, does some daze, some bleed, life drain.
Yeah.
Troll Axe.
We're just falling down the list on the amount of damage that you can do with your strength hero and what utility it might bring.
Yeah.
They're ranked appropriately. Fire Sword's gonna, you would rather have the damage. If you can't get damage, then I'd rather have the shock. If I don't have the shock, then I fall to the Jade Saw.
Right.
And so on and so on.
It's pretty crazy too. You can have a 20 damage weapon at tier 2 actually, right out of the gate. So if you're at this point looking at the Jade Saw and going, you probably are in kind of bad shape with your strength hero. There's probably a lot better options at that point.
If Jade Saw's my best weapon at this point, then I'm really getting unlucky.
You're really getting unlucky, yeah.
You probably have died at that point, and therefore you're restarting
and that's
anyways.
a lost civilization weapon as well. So if I'm getting Troll Axe as my best weapon, it's like, oh my god, I'm having a bad game.
Okay, so then we go back a large step up to the tier 5 weapons. Obsidian Blades, I'm actually going to kind of leave that to you two guys. I don't have access to that particular weapon as a console player. Of course, I play with you guys on PC from time to time, but I haven't really actually used this weapon particularly myself. Frozen Great Hammer, really good weapon to get your hands on. This is definitely one of the best weapons for us console players here. being able to do that heavy attack. It's nice also that he does freeze as well too. That's just an extra added bonus. They can freeze and do the heavy attack as well too. It can also daze as well. So there's some good kind of secondary utility and our top utility in terms of damage, and it also is a 34 base damage weapon. Ice Sword, interestingly enough, you can actually get really, really lucky with this particular weapon. You can get it in an embedded blade before you even go into King's Maze. This is where I talk about the talent hero, and if you're able to actually get the Ice Sword going into King's Maze, or if you're able to get Iron Anchor going into King's Maze, and you just rush the dude with these weapons, it's chef's kiss. It's beautiful, and that's it's fantastic. Dragon Blade is, of course, it's definitely the top tier of your single-handed weapon. It is the weapon that allows you to do reset, but again, when we talk about the strength hero, you're usually not selecting this to do utility. It is nice in certain aspects when you do need to do that single reset, but again, you're usually relying on your flanks, which is your intel and talent heroes, to be able to do this. You may have a different build of your team, so maybe this is an applicable weapon to have, but definitely this kind of drops off a little bit after this point from 4 on down.
Yeah, usually when I'm using a weapon like the Dragon Blade or the Gladius that has a single target reset for a strength weapon, it's an odd situation where my intelligence hero is using a really, really powerful weapon like a Death Wand. And so I'm literally swapping their roles around. I'm using the strength character to do the resets, and I'm using the intelligence character to do the huge amount of damage. It's a swap. One thing I want to say about the Obsidian Blades is the Obsidian Blades is very much like the Iron Anchor. Its whirlwind attack is 30 damage with a 15 splash, just like the A-Way attack from the Iron Anchor. However, Whirlwind has a minus 5% accuracy, so if you don't get all of your checks, it's not going to do as much damage. But it's adding 12% crit chance plus 10 speed. It's pretty good. It's on par with what probably the Iron Anchor can do. There is also no reduction from the maximum damage of the weapon, so 30 damage, and you look at the Whirlwind, 30 damage. There's no percentage penalty if you're doing something like a Hildebrand's to increase your attack up for your character. Now, when you look at the Frozen Great Hammer, its main attack is 34 damage, but its shockwave is 29. That's not a 5 damage reduction. That's a 15% reduction in the overall damage being done. So when you use Frozen Great Hammer and you combine that with a Hildebrand's Reserve to increase your damage output by about 100%, that overall damage is being reduced by 15%. So it actually does less damage overall than something like the Obsidian Blades or the Iron Anchor can do because of that.
Yeah, so this is why Obsidian Blades is on par with Iron Anchor for the most part, because its main damage is the same as the Whirlwind, which basically it does the same amount of damage Iron Anchor has done, or Iron Anchor does, which is why we value it highly. Because if you have Iron Anchor, you're very likely to even need to purchase or use Frozen Great Hammer or Ice Sword, because Iron Anchor will still do more splash damage than either of those two weapons. Mostly because, like in Frozen Great Hammer's case, like Mike just said, because of the 15% damage reduction, Iron Anchor still ends up doing more damage with its splash, even though Frozen Great Hammer looks to be more damage. It's actually not in the splash department. So Obsidian Blades is really the only way to improve over Iron Anchor. Another thing about the Whirlwind, not only does it do an accuracy penalty, but if you miss a check, you actually do not splash, period. It's Iron Anchor, you still splash if you miss a check. In Obsidian Blade's case, if you miss one check, you don't splash. Now, because this weapon gives you 12% crit chance, that kind of counteracts that a little bit. So you're more likely to get perfects with it, at the very least. And the speed difference from Iron Anchor and Obsidian Blades is a whopping 15. Because if you remember, Iron Anchor is minus 5. So you're actually, if you're going from Iron Anchor to Obsidian Blades, you're gaining 15 speed, which is ridiculous. You would end up swinging these blades way faster than you would Iron Anchor.
Yes. Thing about the Obsidian Blades, though, is it's tier 5, whereas the Iron Anchor is tier 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mhm.
so it's you're only going to get it late game. It's not going to help you as much as the Iron Anchor would have if you had gotten it earlier.
Yes.
It's also only Lost Civilization DLC makes this available. So if you don't have that, then you're never going to be able to find Obsidian Blades anyway.
Mm.
So and it's rare. So it's it's much harder to find Obsidian Blades. If I've already got the Iron Anchor, I probably won't even bother getting the Obsidian Blades. It's not enough of an improvement to make a difference. I
You'll
only
probably-
get Obsidian Blades if I've never found an Iron Anchor.
Yeah. Those of you who know of me and watch my stream, I will often get Iron Anchor and will win the game with it. Because in my opinion, there's no weapon better than Iron Anchor. Obsidian Blades is the only other weapon that can be better than Iron Anchor.
So as we'll kind of then just kind of push through this here. So kind of rounding out the rest of the tier 5 weapons. Again, these are now just weapons that are pretty much, of course, just doing high amounts of damage. You got the giant club. It's a big speed reduction. It does do 37 damage though, and it does have crushing blow, but at a pretty big cost at 35% accuracy. Fire axe, again, does pretty good damage, does 33 damage, and allows for you to also do the power strike. So it's a pretty nice little weapon to have if for some reason you're just unable to get some of the other top tier weapons. I've actually played with Fire Axe quite a bit going into Vexor's Tower because I didn't have access to Obsidian Blades or Iron Anchor, and sometimes you're not going to get those really other rare ones. So having Fire Axe is actually, even though it's 6 on this list, I wanted to actually make sure I pointed this out because it's going to drop off the list of our top 4 at the very end of the game. But this is actually still a pretty good, decent weapon to have going into the end of the game.
Yeah. One of the other thing about the giant club, it does more single target damage than most any other weapon in the game. So sometimes when I'm in a demon cave and I'm coming to the final battle against the Ember Demon, he's a lone character. There's nothing to splash. Sometimes if I have that and I have an Iron Anchor, I actually might switch out of the Iron Anchor into the Giant Club just to deliver as much single target damage as I can possibly do against a single enemy like an Ember Demon.
Then you have the Lightning Sword. The Lightning Sword is kind of just for the Fire Revenant. We've talked about this a little bit, is if you need something to be able to shock. Hopefully you're not relying on your Strength Hero to be the one to do the shocking ability, but you know, if that's what you have, that's what you have. You kind of put that in your back pocket just to go into the Vexor's Tower. The Demon Blade, again, it's just 26 damage weapon. You definitely want a higher upgrade to that, so it's not really all that great that if you're relying on that weapon, that's probably not a good one to go into at the very end of the game. Kind of rounding out the rest of them, Obsidian Saw. This is a DLC weapon. Again, just does 35 damage. It's pretty much what it does. You're not really looking at bleed or life drain as being anything special. Flange Mace, 27 damage with a little bit extra crit. Again, hopefully you're not relying on these particular weapons at the very end of the game. And Demon Bone, 26 damage. It does have a power-up attack, but again, its base damage is at 26 compared to the other ones that are in the 30 range. So these are just kind of the last few weapons you would see in Tier 5. Anything that you guys want to add before we talk about what the best final weapons are going into Vexor's Tower?
No.
All right. That's what I like to hear. So, as Mike had said, Obsidian Blades is a better weapon. But because you can get Iron Anchor so early, and Sheldon even said this, he'll just win the game with this particular weapon. This goes back to multiple times talking about if you get access to the Iron Anchor, you get a single rush weapon with your talent hero, and you're just rushing that Iron Anchor over and over and over again. It's absolutely devastating on the enemy. Don't give them a chance to attack them. Kill them as much as possible. That's why we love to pair out a talent hero with a strength hero, because the strength hero is just going to absolutely pour out a lot of damage. Also, when you talk about going into Vexor's Tower, I do want to talk a little bit about what these guys were talking about in terms of crit chance, and also focusing on having having armor that gives you higher physical damage output. So what you're doing is maybe putting on Inferno Greaves, an Inferno helmet, and then the Inferno plate. I don't know if it's actually called Inferno Plate, but it sounded
Infernal Armor.
Infernal Armor. Okay, I thought I said that wrong. So
Yeah, the chest plate. Yeah.
But what you may be worried about is I only have 70 focus points or 70 stat for my strength. Well, to be honest, you're probably not worried about that. What you do is you end up making sure you have some type of confuse immunity. You throw on a Hildebrandt's Reserve going into Vexor's Tower. You rush this guy. He can then do 1 billion damage like Mike was talking about. He can do about 100 damage. Literally, you just pump like 4 focus points into it because, again, it doesn't really matter what the stat is. If you do full focus, you can just absolutely just annihilate the entire team. You can watch ton of Sheldon streams, just goes in and just like goes into each level, and it's just instant delete as he's just kind of going all the way up. Because when you combine this with Hildebrandt's Reserves, make sure you have confuse immunity, you have this high damage output, you're not really worried about doing anything else, just rush this guy to kill Vexor's Tower.
To make it clear, so see how it says Iron Anchor is 30 damage? When you're going to Vexor's Tower, you're very likely to be level 10, and every point of every level is a damage increase. You're 40 damage with Iron Anchor. If you have all the crit chance armor, which also gives you attack damage, if you have the entire Infernal set, Golden Skull, and Amulet of Souls, you can get to like 60 damage with Iron Anchor without attack up, without Hillebrandts, nothing. And if you Hillebrandts with 60 damage on top of that, that's where you get just disgusting damage.
Now you're doing 120 damage with 60 damage splashing to the sides.
It's gross.
So, you're going up against the Lightning Revenant, and you're doing 120 damage to the Lightning Revenant with 60 to the sides. If you rush him, you've completely destroyed that team in 2 shots.
Yep.
And so that's pretty much it. Strength, it's ultimately about DPS, just damage, destroy things, get them out of the way. And again, we go back to these are pretty much all double-handed weapons. So grab the best weapon that does the best damage, kill your enemies so they don't get a chance to kill you. Thank you guys so much for joining us today going over the strength weapons. For myself, Sir Imperial Mike, Sheldon, and I think I just said myself twice there, so that's a great way to end it. I'm the most important person here, so heaven forbid I talk about myself twice. But thank you guys so much for joining us. We do actually have one more video in this series to do, which is intelligence. If there's anything that you guys would like to discuss when it comes to the abilities, the starting weapons, and the last 3 hero classes that we talked about, or if you have something specific you'd like for us to talk about in the Intel video, make sure that you guys join us on Discord. Ask questions there. We would love to help you guys out. We thank you guys so much for your time, and we're excited to wrap this thing up with the absolute best class in the game, intelligence. And we will give you guys so much information in there that it'll blow your mind how to just absolutely destroy this game, even on Masters. Thank you guys so much, and have a great rest of your day.